We all have moments when a name escapes us or an earlier conversation is fuzzy, but when does difficulty recalling information require a trip to the doctor and an evaluation for Alzheimer's or dementia? Join us as Dr. Aaron Nelson of Harvard Medical School talks about memory loss that warrants medical attention and why an early diagnosis is so important. Author of the Harvard Medical School Guide to Achieving Optimal Memory, Dr. Nelson will also discuss risk factors for dementia and Alzheimer's, how to recognize the signs of serious memory trouble and which tests to ask for to ensure an accurate diagnosis. Plus, you'll get tips and tricks for keeping your recall as strong as possible. As always, our expert guests answer questions from the audience. Announcer. Welcome to this Health Talk webcast. Before we begin, we remind you that the opinions expressed on this webcast are solely the views of our guests. They are not necessarily the views of Health Talk, our sponsors, or any outside organization. And, as always, please consult your own physician for the medical advice most appropriate for you. Now here's your host, Rick Turner. Rick Turner. Ingrid Bergman once said that happiness is good health and a bad memory. Sometimes we forget the past and at other times we twist it. Some memories we treasure, while others haunt us for years. But as we grow older, we all have moments when a name escapes us or the details grow fuzzy. So, what is memory really? And what is the difference between normal forgetfulness and memory troubles that could be the sign of something more serious? Welcome to this Health Talk webcast. When is memory loss a symptom of Alzheimer's or dementia? And joining us on the line from Boston, Massachusetts today is Dr. Aaron P. Nelson, Chief of Psychology and Neuropsychology at Brigham and Women's Hospital and an Assistant Professor of Psychology at Harvard Medical School. He is also co-author of the Harvard Medical School Guide to Achieving Optimal Memory. Dr. Nelson, welcome to Health Talk. Dr. Aaron Nelson. Thanks, Rick. Glad to be here. Rick. So, Dr. Nelson, let's start with the basics, and the question that I posed in the opening, what is memory? Dr. Nelson. Actually, memory is more than one thing. It turns out that we have several different systems in the brain that depend on different strategies, different parts of the brain for remembering different types of information. So when you ask, what is memory, the answer is, it kind of depends. It depends on what the material is, what the experience is that you are encountering or remembering, and what sort of system gets pulled in to do that work. Rick. So there is not just one place in the brain we can point to and say that's where memories are kept. Memory is one of the functions in the brain that we call widely distributed. It really resides in patterns of neuronal activation, patterns of electrical activity that reside all throughout the brain. It's a very widely distributed network of neurons that supports our memory for different kinds of information. Rick. Do we know specifically how memories are formed and how they are stored? Dr. Nelson. We know a lot about that. There's a lot we don't know, but again it's going to depend, Rick, on what type of information we are speaking of in terms of how they are formed and how they are stored. So let's take for example memory for an event, what we call episodic memory, memory for an episode. You have to start with perception, our taking in of information from the external world. So, for example, something that you saw today, maybe you encountered some kind of a situation or you had a meeting. You are taking in information through vision, through hearing, through other sensory modalities. And this sensory information strikes specialized nerve cells in the brain, which are specifically designed to handle that kind of input. So there are cells that only respond to visual information. There are cells that only respond to what we hear, sounds and so forth, and these neurons respond to our experience by firing in a certain way that sets up a network of activation. That network of activation is the trace of that experience, and ultimately, when we remember an event, we are remembering the various sensory inputs to that event that reside in these patterns of activation, and the brain does this incredible magic trick of taking all that sensory information and melding it together so it forms a holistic kind of an episodic memory. I think you sort of alluded to a very important fact about memory in your introduction, which is that memory is not static at all. Memory changes perpetually. From the moment you encounter something and you register it, that memory trace is going to be modulated. It's going to be modified continuously by new experiences so that, as you get further in time away from that experience and that event, you are in a sense a different person. So when you remember things, it's also through the lens of other memories which have come after it and have modified it. So memory is not static. It's dynamic. It changes, and this kind of changeability of memory is one of the culprits that can get people into trouble in terms of the differing versions people have of the way they remember an event. So much depends on your perspective in that event, where you are literally standing, and how the type of person you are encountering that information is going to have a lot to do with how you experience and then remember it. Rick. Of course, the focus of our program today is aging and its effect on memory. Do we know how aging affects memory? Journal Sun. There are lots of theories about aging and the brain. We can look at, for example, the way the age process affects the brain as an organ, as a physical structure, and it should be no surprise to any of us that the brain is going to change with age just like any other system in the human body, the heart, the skin, the bones and so forth. Everything changes through the life cycle, and so does the brain. If you are looking for one theory that I feel really accounts for most of the variance in the way we change with time in terms of memory, it has to do with how quickly we can process information, and that's something which does tend to slow down a bit as we age. So, how much information per unit of time we can actually take in and make sense of and reliably encode, if you will, that's going to change as